Hey everybody, this is Francis Check with Video Realm Media, and today I'm going to be showing you how to create this amazing scene inside of After Effects using Element 3D and Metal's new plugin, Flux. As you can see, this is a very detailed scene with a lot of going on. First off, we have the mountains with the dynamic lighting, the aurora borealis is in the sky animated, and even some shooting stars that are passing by in the sky. All of this combined goes for a very dynamic and complex scene. So let's jump into After Effects and I'll show you how it's done. Alright, so we're in After Effects, and the first thing that we'll want to do is create a new composition. So let's go up here and go to Composition, New Composition, and we'll label this as Flux Aurora Borealis, and 1920 by 1080 is fine, and the frame rate is 24, and that's also fine. Let's go ahead and put this to maybe 15 seconds, and we'll hit OK. Alright, so we're in our new composition, and first let's go ahead and add in our mountains so we can add some camera movement, and that way we have a good idea where we should put the aurora borealis. So let's go ahead and go up to Layer, New, Solid. We'll bring this down. We'll go ahead and label this as Element 3D. Alright, and let's go ahead and hit OK. And we'll go ahead and go over to our Effects and Presets folder, and we'll just search for Element. And there it is. We'll drag this on our Element 3D layer, and go to the Scene Setup. Alright, so we're here in Element 3D now, and I'm going to be using my new 3D model pack for Element 3D and other 3D software called Terrascape. Terrascape is a 3D model pack that has a large variety of terrains for any kind of render you may be making, from snowy mountains to desert dunes. But today, we're going to be using a snowy mountain for this scene. So I've loaded up a snowy mountain here. This one is Snowy Mountain 3 from Terrascape. And everything's pretty good as far as the default settings. We have our scale set to 100. So let's go ahead and hit OK. Alright, so our model is loaded up, and the next thing that we want to do is create a new camera. So let's go up to Layer, New, Camera. And for the preset, let's go ahead and choose a 15mm camera since we want the camera to have a very wide angle on the scene. And let's go ahead and hit OK. Okay, so next let's go into our Group 1 settings into Element 3D, go over to our Group Utilities, and create a new group null. So we will want our mountain to be quite a bit bigger. So let's hit S on our keyboard while selecting the Group 1 null. And let's go ahead and set this to 800%. And not to worry, this will be a little large, but we'll just scoot this back on the Z-axis using the Group 1 null. It looks like right about here should work. Alright, so now we're going to rotate our mountain to get that perfect angle. So let's go ahead and hit W on our keyboard, go to the green arrow here, and let's just rotate this maybe like right about here. Alright, that looks pretty good. So next, let's go ahead and grab our camera here, and we can go into our transform settings, and let's go ahead and keyframe our point of interest, position, and orientation. And let's just get our first look of the frame here so we can back the camera up a little bit, quite a lot actually, and move this down. We'll move this over. We zoom in a little bit more. Basically, whichever view looks best for you. It's really a lot of tweaking and finessing, trying to just get that perfect angle. Alright, so after a little bit of tweaking, it looks like this is probably the best angle right here. If you're going to go for maybe a little bit more of a realistic approach, the best way to think of creating these kind of scenes is try to think of it as a real world scenario. Like, how would they get this shot? So if you're maybe flying a drone, you wouldn't be flying super high. So I'm trying to get pretty close to these mountains right here, but not too close. So I'm estimating like maybe somewhere right around here would probably work. So we're going to stick with this. So now that we have our first keyframes in place, we're going to go and scoot forward in time to the 15-second mark. And we're going to push the camera in just a little bit. Maybe, let's just say right about here. It's going to be pretty quick. We'll go ahead and move the camera down just a little bit more. So now if we play this back, you can kind of see how we're just flying through the scene. Something else that helps sell the scene, if it's not overdone, is just a little bit of camera wobble. So we'll go into our orientation settings. Well, clicking Alt and clicking on the stopwatch can bring up this little menu right here. And we can type in the expression wiggle, parentheses, 0.5, comma, 0.5, in parentheses. And when we play this back, you can see how we have this very slight camera wobble. And it helps just add a little bit more realism to it. It's a little bit easier to see if I scrub through. You can just kind of see it, just barely there. So we have a general idea of where we are going to be putting the aurora borealis in the scene. So maybe one off to the left, one in the center, and then one off to the right. So let's go ahead and light our mountain with some dynamic lighting to match the aurora borealis. So let's go ahead and go up to Layer, New, Light. And we're going to want this to be a point light. So the first light, let's go ahead and change to maybe a green color. And let's move the intensity up to 600. And then our diffusion, let's turn that up to 2750. And hit OK. And now it's going to be a little bright, but that's okay. We're going to position this light correctly in the scene to where it won't be so intense. Besides positioning the light in a different area to get the light to be not as intense, we can go into our Element 3D settings, Render settings, Lighting, and then we can turn this light fall off to 0.27. This will just help to make the light look a little bit more realistic and a little bit more natural. So let's move our first light into place. So we can move this over a little bit this way. And this is also one of those things that just takes a little bit of tweaking to get it perfect. And now to make this light animated, we're also going to be using that wiggle property that we used for the camera. But this time, we're going to go over to the position of the light, hold down Alt and click the stopwatch, and we're going to type in wiggle, parentheses, 1,1000, end parentheses. So now if we scrub through the timeline, you can kind of see how there's this slight flicker on the mountain. And that's due to this light right over here that we just created to moving around and just kind of creating this crazy path, but that's exactly what we want in this case. And so we'll need to create one more light that's more of a blue color since we're going to be creating this aurora borealis as a green and blue color. So let's go ahead and duplicate our point light number 1. And there we go. And let's go ahead and just move it over here so kind of get a perspective. So we'll want to place this one just on the other side. We don't want it to be too intense. So let's say right about there. All right, now that we have our other light there, let's go ahead and change the color just to be a little bit more blue. So let's go ahead and maybe right about there. We can also bring the intensity of this light up a little bit. So let's say right about there. All right, so next let's go ahead and add a little bit more camera animation. So in our camera settings, let's go ahead and go to our orientation. If you don't see this menu, just hit R on your keyboard. So at orientation, and let's maybe go to the 11-second mark in your timeline, and we'll go and add a keyframe. We'll go back to the very beginning, and we're just gonna rotate our camera up and off to the side a little bit. So let's say right there. So we play this back. You can kind of see what this animation is looking like. So far it's looking pretty good. The only issue is that whenever it gets to this part, we can see that it just kind of abruptly stops. An easy way to fix this is that this keyframe is causing that abrupt stop. So when that keyframe is selected, just hit F9. And when we play this back now, you'll kind of see how it just gradually slows down and then smooths out and stops. So I think for our camera animation, this looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and move on to the next step. Something that I'm noticing is that we're seeing a lot of this haze on the mountain. It just doesn't look very good. And that's due to the environment map lighting the scene. Now, if we think about it, we don't necessarily want the environment map lighting the scene since we already have two lights that are lighting the scene with the colors that we want. So let's head into the Element 3D render settings. And in our physical environment settings, let's turn this lighting influence to 98%. And with that, you can really see how these colors are really starting to pop a lot. We can see a lot more detail and a lot more color now in the mountains how we want it. So now that we've reduced the lighting influence in the environment map, you can really see the colors pop out of the mountain, and we can see that animation a lot more clearly. So next, let's go ahead and add in our aurora borealis using flux. All right, so let's go ahead and create a new layer for flux. So let's go up to Layer, New, Solid, and we'll label this as Flux, and hit OK. And we'll want to drag this layer down below our Element 3D layer, so it's just kind of here in the background. And let's go over to our effects and presets and type in Flux, Go over to metal flux and let's drag this on our flux layer. All right, so we've dragged on flux, but you may not see anything, but that's all right. All we need to do is go over to our preset right here and let's choose the aurora borealis. All right, so now we have flux in our composition, but as you can see, it's a little bit large and not really looking how we want it to look. Still looks cool though, but we need to change a few settings. So the first settings, let's go ahead and change a few things. So let's go into our scale, change that to 9, change our intensity to 70, and our iterations to 9. One thing that we definitely want to make sure that we do is push this back in Z space since it's a little too close to the camera. So to do that, let's go into our 3D transform and let's go ahead and change these settings. So for the volume size, let's change that to 72, turn our scale X to 113, and turn our scale Z to 160. Then we'll turn our volume X rotation to 20, our volume rotation Y to -7, and our volume rotation Z to 328. All right, and then for our volume position, turn that to -7 on the X-axis, -18 on the Y-axis, and 17.5 for the Z-axis. All right, so we're finished with our 3D transform settings for now, so let's go into our mutation settings. So let's go into mutation 1, and let's go and edit these. So first off, we want to change this color to a little bit more of a blue. So let's say maybe right about there. That looks good. And for our brightness, we're going to change this to 50%. And then for our scale XY, we can leave that on 75. All these can stay 90. For the M1 shear ZX, we want to change that to 86. We'll leave our rotation settings alone, and we'll go on to our M1 translation on the Y-axis, and we're going to change that to -228. We'll also want to change our M1 shear ZY to 9%. Rotate that down a little bit. All right, so this is good for the mutation 1 settings. And then we'll go on to our mutation 2 settings. And for this one, we'll want to change our color just a little bit more of a dimly lit green. Let's say like right about there. We can also come back and change this if we need to. For our brightness for this, we're going to change this to 165, change the scale to 78, jump down to our M2 shear XY settings, and then change that to 73. And then right below that for our shear XZ, we're going to change that to -52. And just below that one for our shear YX, we're going to change that to 70. And then towards the bottom of the shear settings on our M2 shear ZY, we're going to change this value to -36. So next, all we have to do is tweak our evolution settings. So we'll go up here to our evolution settings, and we can just kind of move these around to where they look good. So let's say like right there. All right, so this is looking pretty good so far, but I know we can make it better. So there's a really cool setting inside of Flux that's called force field. If we open that up, you can see that if we can choose like a sphere and we can expand this up, you can see how it's really just a massive force field. And we can do a lot with this. So we're going to use this to our advantage and cause a little bit of organic warping. And so let's go to our force field shape, and we're going to change this to an octahedron. And some of the settings that we'll want to change here is we'll change this to 14.9, change our feather to 41. We'll turn up our strength just a little bit more, maybe to like 2.3, and we'll move our Z position to -0.4. Next, instead of explosion, let's change this to implosion swirl. All right, so now we have this really cool shape. This is definitely getting closer to what we're looking for, but we want to animate this. So the easiest way to do this is let's go to the very beginning of our composition, and let's add a set of keyframes at the very beginning for our evolution X, Y, and Z. So the first set of values, for the X, we're going to go ahead and type in -13. For our Y, we're going to put 36. And for our Z, we're going to put 54. All right, and so now we'll go to the end of our composition, and we'll change these values for X to -0.8, evolution Y to 62, and our evolution Z to 89. All right, so this is looking really nice. We have some of that animation going now. Something that I did notice is that it's a little off-centered. So we can go back into our 3D transform settings, and we'll just scoot this over just a little bit. Basically, whenever the camera is on with the mountain directly on the center, kind of want this to also be on the center as well. So let's say right about here. It doesn't have to be exact. You may have to tweak a little bit of the settings to get it perfectly, but this is looking pretty good right here. So if you've seen a picture of the aurora borealis, you know that they have these sort of straight up and down lines about them. So something that I figured out that can replicate it pretty closely is using a directional blur. So if we get a directional blur and apply that to our flux layer, and say if we go to like an intensity of 38, you can see how we kind of get that nice, really smooth look in the sky. It definitely helps sell the effect. If we scroll through here, you can see how that's making that really, really nice. Something else that we'll want to add is a glow. So if we type in glow, we'll go ahead and drop this right below the directional blur. And this is also one of those settings that will take a little bit of tweaking. In this instance, we want to just have this really large glow over the whole thing. So we can just tweak these settings until we like them. It doesn't have to be anything too specific. We're going to add another glow on top of everything for the color correction. So this isn't too crucial, just as long as we have that little bit of haze around it. So next, we're going to want to duplicate this 2 more times. So let's go ahead and duplicate flux, and we'll label this one as flux left. And then once we have the flux left layer selected, we'll scoot that over on the x-axis just a little bit over here. Okay, so for the most part, we're going to leave a lot of the settings the same. We will change just a few to give it a little bit more of a variety. So for our evolution, we'll leave our first keyframes the same. We'll go to the very end of our composition. We're going to change our X evolution to 17, our evolution Y to 66, and our evolution Z to 100. Okay, and then we'll go over to our mutation settings for mutation 1, and we're going to change our mutation 1 brightness to 198. And then we'll change our M1 scale to 61. Then we'll change our M1 scale Y to 67, our shear ZX to 40, and our shear ZY to 13. And under that, under translation Y, we'll change that to 30. All right, so that's good for our mutation 1 settings. And now we'll move over to our mutation 2 settings. So for our mutation 2 settings, we're going to change this to a little bit more of a blue color and just darken it down a little bit. All right, and then we'll change our M2 brightness to 100%, our scale XYZ to 70. Then we'll change our shear XY to 40. And then we'll change our shear XZ to -40 and our shear YX to 40. And under that, under our shear ZY, we'll change that to 0. All right, so that's it for the mutation settings. And now we'll just move this one in place. So that looks pretty good. We can scoot back in time. All right, and now we just have one more left. So we'll duplicate our flux layer on the bottom, move this above the flux left. We'll hit enter on our keyboard, and we'll label this one as flux right. All right, so let's go ahead and move this one over. So let's go over to our 3D transform settings, and then we'll change our volume scale X to 148, our volume rotation X to 9, our volume rotation Y to 148, and our volume rotation Z to -81. After that, let's go ahead and just position this exactly where we want it in the scene. Okay, and right about there. So that looks pretty good for our scene. Next, let's go ahead and check our mutation settings. So let's change our brightness to 100, our M1 scale to 75%, our scale X to 128, our scale Y to 67, our scale Z to 90, our shear YZ to 160, our shear ZY to 22. And then on the bottom, we'll change our M1 translation Y to 30, our shear YX to 40. All right, so that's it for our mutation 1 settings. And now let's go ahead and move into our mutation 2 settings. All right, so for our brightness, we'll change that to 100. Our scale XYZ to 75. Our shear XY to 40. Our shear XZ to -40. Our shear YX to 40. And our shear ZY to 0. Next, let's change our iterations to 8. All right, so now let's go ahead and do the final touches on our flux right layer and adjust the evolution settings. So let's go to the very end of our composition, and for our evolution X, let's type in 17. For our Y, let's type in 66. And for our evolution Z, let's type in 100. All right, so now that we're finished with our evolution settings, I don't like where this is positioned, so let's go ahead and just move this around a little bit. I don't want to see this big sort of blob right here. I just want to see sort of the edge of that. Let's see, so let's maybe raise this part up a little bit. Maybe we'll move it forward. Maybe up and then a little bit more to the side. So that looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and check a preview of this and see how it's looking. All right, so this is actually looking pretty good. I am noticing that it's a little too quick. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back and just slow everything down just a little bit. Really, this depends on what your tastes are, if you would like it a bit quicker or a little bit slower. But for me, I'm gonna go for just a little bit slower, and then we'll take it from there. All right, I've slowed down the animation just a little bit. I'm really liking this speed, so we'll go ahead and stick with this. So next, let's go ahead and add in some stars in the background. So for the background, I actually used a combination of 2 photos. So I used this photo right here, which is this large panoramic with the northern lights. And then this one, which has a little bit more of the stars and a little bit of clouds on the edges. So these 2 worked really well. So I'm gonna drag these into my composition. So first I'm gonna drag in Northern Sky 2. And we're just gonna scale this to however we want it. We can change it to a 3D layer. If it goes black, that's okay. We'll just double tap A. And we'll go over to accept lights and just turn that off. There we go. And now we can rotate this layer over here. Rotate on the X. Essentially just gonna get this lined up. All right, so that looks pretty good. And then we can kind of scale this up a little bit. And we'll leave it right about here. The next thing that I'm noticing is that it's a little too bright, so we can add a curves adjustment. So we can type in curves in the effects and presets. Just drag this down here. Let's move this slider down here. Bring this one down as well, so it's not too contrasted. And it's a little oversaturated, so I'm gonna add a tint effect to desaturate it. And I'm just gonna change this to 50%. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I am noticing that the image is just a little soft looking, so I'm gonna also add a sharpen effect. We'll just drag that on, and maybe we'll just set it to an amount like 15. So the first thing that we're gonna notice is that it looks like it's a big picture behind this mountain, and that's not gonna work. We want it to be pushed back in Z space. So we'll hit P on our keyboard and just scoot this back way back there. There we go. And then we'll just scale it up. Maybe we'll go forward a little bit, and let's go ahead and get this aligned. So maybe we can scale it down a little bit more. Just right where we want it. So let's say, be right there. Okay. So that's looking pretty good. Something else that we can do is let's go and go down here and change this to screen. That way, if we duplicate this later, we can have all the different effects back there. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to a few more of our element settings. So now that we're getting a little bit closer to a finished product here, so we can close these down right here, then go into our element 3D settings, and in our shadows, we're gonna enable ray traced shadows. And something you may notice is that down here in this corner, we're gonna get a lot of this noise, and that's due to the fact that we need to increase the shadow samples. So normally, we could try 5. Let's see what 5 looks like. So that looks pretty clean. If we kind of look at the picture as a whole, see what it looks like without shadows, and then with shadows, you can see it's definitely adding in that contrast in these areas. And the next setting is ambient occlusion. And if we turn it on and change it to ray traced, we can see it's adding in just that subtle diffused shading here in the mountain. You just see it. It just makes it look a little bit more realistic. Also, I'm seeing a little bit more of that haze kind of being introduced. So if you do see that, you can go into your physical environment settings and then go to your rotate environment. And you can kind of tweak these settings just to kind of move it around, maybe eliminate a little bit more of that. So if we just kind of move this right here, and if it gets to the point where it's just a little too annoying and it's a little too noticeable, you can actually change the tint of your environment map. So we could change this to more of like a green, maybe a bluish green. That way it's not so much of a white haze, and we could bring it back some of that illumination. So maybe we'll make it a little bit more green. Maybe that's too much. You just really have to play with this. Leave it back on 98. But just tweak the settings to what you'd like. We could even move the lighting around a little bit more just to get it right where we want it. Overall, this is looking pretty good though. I think I'm gonna brighten up this light a little bit more just to bring out that side of the mountain. Maybe make it a little bit more blue. It's looking pretty good. Maybe we'll make that one blue and then change the other one to be a little bit more green. Maybe like this. Let's try this. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. Okay, so now let's go ahead and move on to our final color correction. So we'll go up to Layer, New, Adjustment Layer. And we'll just hit Enter on the keyboard and change this to CC for color correction. And we're just going to do some really basic stuff because this color is already looking so good that I don't think we have to tweak it very much. So let's go to Curves. And we'll just drag that on our CC layer. And we're just going to add a little bit of contrast to the image. And we don't want to do it too much because we'll start losing detail in the shadows of the mountains. It's already pretty dark. And then we'll just go through here. We're just going to tweak some of the color adjustments. Maybe get our reds and our greens. Make this a little bit more blue. Maybe we could even brighten it up a little bit now that we've kind of introduced some more of that color. We don't want it too even, but just the right amount should work. I may be overdoing it, but that's definitely adding in some better color for the aurora borealis. All right, so that's looking pretty good. I think the last thing that we can do here is add maybe just a little bit more glow to the overall image. Let's go ahead and drag on glow to our CC layer. We're going to turn our threshold down. This is going to look a little intense at first. Basically, we only want our threshold adjusting our sky. So once we start to see it here in the mountain, it's too much. So we just want to do it right as soon as it cuts out. So now what we can do is bring our radius up, and then we're going to turn our intensity way, way low. So we just want this to be very subtle, just so we're getting that nice haze right over that. So I think that's looking pretty good right there. Let's hit fit. And let's hit render and see what we got. All right, so this is what it's looking like so far, and it looks really good. The last thing that we need to do to add the final touch is our shooting stars. And for that, we're going to use particular. So let's go ahead and create a new layer and call it shooting stars. Let's go and make it black and click OK. We'll go over to our effects and presets and type in particular. Just drag this on our layer. All right, so we have particular on there, and let's go ahead and go into the designer tab. All right, so we have our little particles emitting from this. The one thing that we'll want to do right away is change this from an emitter type to the box. And they're kind of just flying all over right now. So let's go ahead and turn our direction speed down to 0. And let's turn our velocity down to 0. So now we just kind of have these particles just spawning. We don't want any velocity from random distribution or from the motion. So we'll shut all these off to 0. So when we're spawning them, they're just kind of spawning in like that, even when we're moving the mouse. All right, so now let's go ahead and go over to our particle type, and let's go ahead and add the particle feather to be a little bit less. We want these to be pretty hard, so we'll change that to 0. Next, we'll go over to our air settings, and let's go ahead and turn our wind Z up to 3000. So now they're just kind of flying in that direction. And then we will want it to be going a little bit this way. So let's maybe turn this to 1,200. Maybe we'll do it even more. Maybe we'll do 1,500. That's looking pretty good. And now it's spawning a little bit too close to the camera, so we want it to be coming from the back. So let's go ahead and go into our emitter type settings, and let's scoot this closer to the camera. Do a little bit more right there. Then we'll move it up a little bit. Maybe we'll center it a little bit more. It's still looking a little, yeah, we're gonna want it a little bit more. So let's go over to our airbound settings again, and let's move our wind X to be a little bit more shooting that way. Perfect. And this may be too fast for right now, but we're just gonna leave it just so we can see where it's heading as far as the direction. And then over in our emitter type, let's go over to emitter size, and we're gonna change this to XYZ individual. So what this means is that we can individually adjust these parameters. Just kind of move them up. So we don't want too much of that. Just want it to be very wide. We want it to cover the whole sky, and maybe a little bit of this. And then we can move the whole thing up a little bit. All right, so that's looking pretty good. So let's go ahead and turn our particles per second to 1 just for this, so we can kind of see just a few fly by. There they go. All right, and next we're gonna turn on our aux system. So let's go ahead and turn this to continuously. All right, so we can kind of see them flying by now. And we're gonna wanna turn up our particles per second a lot. So we want these to be a constant stream. So there we go, you can kind of see them flying past now. It does look a little bit slow, so let's go back into our airbound settings. And we're gonna turn this up to, let's say, 10,000, maybe too much, but let's try that. It's actually not, that doesn't look too bad. So let's keep it on that. And then we may have to move our wind X also to 10,000. So there we go, we can kind of see them passing by. Looks pretty cool. All right. And now for these particles that are flying by, we're gonna want the size over life to just sort of diminish. So for the sake of this, let's go ahead and turn this down. And we can go into the presets and just simply select this one. It does look like they're not dying off fast enough, so we can even turn the life per second down. So we can go to 0.2. Let's try that. Okay. So maybe we have a little too many particles, so we can turn that down. Let's see here. Let's see how this is looking. There we go. So now we're kind of just getting these spawning in like that. And something that really helps, it may be hard to see on your screen right now, but these are just completely white. And whenever you see a shooting star, especially ones that are a little bit closer, they actually have a little bit of discoloration in them. So we're gonna go down here, and we're gonna go to color random, and we're gonna turn this all the way up. And now it's subtle, but you can barely see this flicker in the color as they're passing by. So we can even scale up our particle. So let's go into our size, and we'll scale this up just a little bit. Maybe, I don't know, we don't want it too big. Okay, so let's say like right there. Let's call that good. And we can even turn the size random up. So random speed distribution, random speed rotate, and size random. So we can turn all these parameters up just to get a little bit more variance so they don't all look the same. And then we go in our aux settings. We can also turn up the size of those particles as well. So there we go. It's looking pretty good. So if I pause it on these, you can kind of see how they're discolored just a little bit, but it makes it look pretty neat. So we could just leave it like that. And I think this is pretty good for right now. So let's go ahead and hit apply. Now when we play it, you should see our little shooting stars. And then in here, if we zoom in on it, this is probably a little too discolored. It's a little too discolored. So let's go back. Let's go into our aux settings. And let's go down, and maybe we'll change this color random to about 50%. All right, that looks good. And then let's go ahead and increase the number of particles. So maybe we'll change the particles per second for the aux channel to 1,000. So now we should have, yeah, that looks pretty good. I think that this particle may be a little too big at the end as well. So let's go ahead and scale that one down a little bit. So we'll go into our size and rotation, and it looks like right now the size is at 15, so let's go for 10. All right. Oh yeah, that's so much better. That looks good. All right. So let's go ahead and drag this down below all of our layers except for our background plates for our pictures. So now if we play this, actually we could just solo out these. So let's see. Let's just make sure that this is looking good on our still frames. So it looks like they're passing by. They may be a little too bright or a little too big. Maybe just a little bit. So let's go in here and maybe let's turn our size down. Let's do 8 on the aux particles. And we'll go to size rotation for our main particles. And we'll turn that size down to 9. Does that apply? There we go. So let's go ahead and let this render, and then let's see what we have. Alright guys, we're here at the end of our tutorial. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to us on YouTube. If you want to get notified when we upload any new content, just click that little bell there. Also make sure you head over to metal.com and pick up your copy of Flux. It really is amazing what you can do in there. Having real 3D volumetric fractal flames inside of After Effects is really amazing. So definitely don't miss out. Do yourself a favor and pick up your copy. Also, be on the lookout for our new 3D model pack, Terrascape. It's going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks. It has a bunch of different terrains. You can create some really amazing scenes right inside of Element 3D or your favorite 3D software. Alright guys, that's the end of our tutorial. Make sure you leave your video idea in the comment section below, and we'll see you next time.